Good morning, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here with so many partners from across the ECD landscape. I'm Katherine Tredinnick. I think, Jess, you nailed it earlier. And I'm a research consultant at Ingenie, an EdTech accelerator program, but I also work in a freelance capacity too as an ECD researcher. And today I'll be sharing insights from the valuation of South Africa's National Integrated Early Childhood Development Policy. It was conducted by Genesis Analytics for the DBE and UNICEF South Africa, and that was conducted in 2023 and published in 2024. And I was privileged to be a part of the team working on that evaluation. So we'll use these findings to spark a broader conversation about skills and workforce development in the ECD sector. So, what's working, where the gaps remain, what opportunities lie ahead to strengthen both service delivery and livelihood pathways. So as we go through the insights, I'd love for you to keep in mind the skills dimension, the human capacity that underpins everything in the ecosystem. Which roles, competencies, partnerships do we need to build the ECD workforce of the future? Okay, I'm just scrolling to the next, there we go. And we'll end the session with breakout discussions. So you'll have the chance to dive deeper into specific areas, so maternal and child health, child social protection and safety, parenting and caregiver support, and early learning. But we also want you to consider some cross-cutting skills, those linked to infrastructure, local services, and so on. So let's start by grounding ourselves in what the evaluation tells us about where the sector currently stands. Before diving into the findings, let's just quickly pause to remind ourselves what sits at the heart of the National Integrated ECD policy. And that's the comprehensive package of services. And I think it's really a familiar framework to many of us, but I think it's useful to visualize how these policy areas map to broader themes that we work across every day, in health and nutrition, social protection, parenting support, early learning, infrastructure, leadership. So as we go through each of these areas, I'd like you to think to yourself, where are the skills gaps? Where are the opportunities emerging? Is it workforce shortages? Are they training needs? Are there new hybrid roles that could strengthen delivery? So really keep those in mind, and you'll get the opportunity to discuss that with others in the ecosystem during the breakout room discussions. So let's start with maternal and child health and nutrition. The goal here is to ensure that every young child's health, nutrition, development are supported from the very beginning of life, particularly during those first 1,000 days. And predominantly, service provision for this goal falls within the realm of the Department of Health and its partners. And before I walk through these findings, you'll notice that some of the points on the slide are in blue, which is not the most aesthetically appealing, but these reflect updated statistics and data since the valuation was completed and published in 2024. So stats that have come in after that. And the data landscape has shifted slightly. So for example, on child mortality and immunization coverage, but the core takeaways from the valuation remain consistent. So what's working is encouraging. Maternal mortality, which spiked during COVID-19, has partly recovered. Clinics and community health workers continue to serve as a critical entry point for families. There is strong policy support for breastfeeding, for growth monitoring and nutrition, and advocacy campaigns like Side by Side and Real Reform for ECD's right to nutrition are keeping these priorities visible. But at the same time, several challenges persist. So neonatal mortality, it's not yet returned to its pre-pandemic levels. Immunization rates also remain lower than before 2020. And stunting and malnutrition related deaths vary sharply between districts, and I think this often reflects the broader inequities in service access. We continue to see some gaps in maternal nutrition, including high rates of anemia among pregnant women. And when we look at integration, it was found that certain referral systems are a bit underdeveloped, and community health workers, who are very much the backbone of this service area, they're often overextended and have limited opportunities for cross-sector collaboration or upskilling. And then moving, or before we move across, sorry, let me go back. And as you hold these insights in mind, I really want to invite you to think about skills and opportunities. You know, what kinds of competencies and support structures could really be helpful in this space. So please do keep that in mind as we move forward. So child's social protection and safety. The goal here, the policy goal here, is to ensure that every young child and their caregivers have access to basic protection, income support, documentation needed to create stable conditions for healthy development. And as before, you'll notice that there's a data point in blue. Again, it reflects a more recent update since the 2024 publication of the evaluation, but the insights and patterns remain largely the same. So what's working is significant. Birth registration is now nearly universal. The Child Support Grant continues to be one of South Africa's most effective poverty alleviation tools. And despite its small value, which was 530 Rand in 2024, research consistently shows that it's well targeted, it's widely accessed, and it has clear positive impacts on nutrition and health outcomes. And we've also seen progress by SASSA in simplifying the grant registration process, which has reduced some barriers for caregivers. There are some stubborn challenges, though. So progress in reducing child poverty has stalled since 2016. In fact, child poverty has increased since then. Coverage remains uneven for children under 2 years. Many children with disabilities are still not being adequately identified or supported. Payment delays in the grant continue in some provinces, and there are shortages of social workers. Also, in some regions, SAP's presence in child protection cases has been found to be a bit limited. And from an integration perspective, referral systems can tend to be a bit unclear and underused. So this can mean that families fall through the cracks between services. So thinking about this again through a skills lens, what might strengthen this part of the ecosystem? Let's keep that in mind. As we move to parenting and caregiver support. So this is, parents are critical stakeholders in the lives of children, but this area often receives less consistent investment and coordination. So the goal here, the policy goal here, is to strengthen parental knowledge, confidence, capacity, and that's especially for those who are facing vulnerability, facing isolation. Again, what's working is encouraging. Parent support programs are highly valued by caregivers who participate in them. There was a study to show that. And the National Parenting Program, for example, has shown some positive outcomes when it's implemented with quality and with fidelity. And there's growing demand for such support, with a new national benchmarking tool for universal parenting support having been published recently. And we also see pockets of integration, parenting sessions being delivered through clinics or ECD centers, which is also really promising. though these efforts tend to remain a bit fragmented and small in scale. So the landscape is quite scattered, with programs delivered regionally by NGOs, and often depending on short-term donor funding. It's also found that data consolidation across the initiatives is somewhat weak, and the cost of implementation can make it very difficult to scale these programs. So even the NPP, while promising, has faced some challenges in rollout and clarity around delivery models. And then when it comes to integration, it too depends quite heavily on NGO initiative rather than institutional systems. And one thing that's not on the slide, but that's also working really well, is the SAPN network, doing great work in the parenting space. So that will be added to the slide for sure. So from a skills perspective, I think this really raises some big questions. What would it take to build a sustainable workforce of parent facilitators, home visitors who could bridge health, education, social sectors to really support families more holistically? So again, I ask you to hold that thought as we move into early learning. So again, data in blue, you know what that means. It's an updated stat since the evaluation was conducted, but the core insights haven't shifted. So I think in terms of what's working, sorry, let me pause on the goal rather. So the goal is to provide quality early learning for all children until school age. And in terms of, what's working, is that there's real policy momentum behind early learning, and the shift of ECD to the DBE, along with the 2030 ECD strategy, has created quite strong alignment and visibility. It's been observed that many ECD centres have adopted play-based approaches. There are also non-centre-based models, playgroups, home visiting, that are gaining traction as a way to reach younger children and rural communities. The challenges do remain significant. COVID-19 deeply disrupted attendance and pushed many ECD centres to the brink. Quality also remains uneven, especially in under-resourced areas, and access for children aged 0 to 3 is still very limited. And in going back to quality, we know from the recent Thrive by 5 index results that of the children in early learning programs, only 42% of them are on track developmentally. And I think there's a real challenge in the sector to navigate both access and increasing access while maintaining quality. And I'm sure that's something that many of you are grappling with. There's also a lack of investment in non-centre-based delivery. And it was also found that practitioners are a bit uncertain about curriculum expectations. And integration across sectors is still limited. So for example, health outreach points, could play a stronger role in promoting play and stimulation, but these links are not yet systematic, even if they are happening in certain pockets. So thinking about skills gaps and opportunities again, what would it take to ensure practitioners in both formal and informal settings are equipped not just to care for children, but to nurture curiosity, play, and early learning outcomes? How can we support pathways that allow them to advance, gain recognition, and remain motivated in the sector? So let's keep that in mind as we move into the next area, which is on leadership, capacity building, and coordination. And that really shapes how all of these other elements come together. So here the NICD policy recognized that without strong coordination and capable leadership, even the most well-designed service packages can't reach their full potential. So in terms of what's working, there are institutional structures like the Interministerial Committee, the National Interdepartmental Committee, the Intersectoral Forum, that have been established. So I won't yet comment on effectiveness, but they've been established in alignment with the goals set out in the 2015 policy. And yeah, to a large extent, the platforms are helping to improve visibility and information sharing. There's also been tangible political commitment to ECD and a very vibrant civil society. There are also many research, or resource and training organizations, rather, that are providing accredited training, and encouragingly, enrollment in early learning courses has also grown. The challenges are real, though. So, although the Interministerial Committee has been established, it was found that these meetings are not taking place all that regularly. And when it comes to the IDC, the Interdepartmental Committee, it was found that attendance was quite often delegated to more junior staff. Accountability across departments is considered fairly weak. Local government capacity has been found to be uneven, and there are legislative and funding bottlenecks that are continuing to slow progress. The qualification and professionalization pathways are still fragmented, with poor service conditions and limited recognition, and I'm sure that this will come up in some of the breakout room discussions. So integration-wise, I think the sector would benefit from clearer mechanisms for joint decision-making and from embedding ECD champions across departments and spheres of government. So let's hold those thoughts as we move to the next area, which is on infrastructure and services. And it's important to note that the physical environment really enables or constrains everything else we've discussed so far. So the NICD policy envisioned safe, accessible, well-equipped facilities as a right for all children and as a prerequisite for integrated service delivery. So I think in terms of what's working, there's national infrastructure and registration standards that now exist. The Vangasali campaign has helped many previously unregistered centres achieve full or conditional registration. The conditional grant has been an important post-COVID mechanism to revitalise the sector, enabling improvements to centres and support for practitioners. But again, the challenges do remain substantial. So many ECD centres do still lack safe and adequate infrastructure. And the long-awaited ECD infrastructure blueprint, as far as I'm aware, although it's been developed, I don't think it's yet been disseminated or operationalized. Registration processes, and although there's more support for this now, they continue to be complex, particularly for smaller or informal centres, and spatial inequities persist, where rural and township areas are facing greatest constraints. So from an integration perspective, poor infrastructure limits the ability of centres to offer multiple services under one roof. So, for example, hosting health or parenting sessions alongside early learning. So I think as we think later about skills, gaps, and opportunities, how might we imagine infrastructure not only as a technical issue, but also as an employment and skills pathway? So let's keep that question in mind as we zoom out to look at the bigger picture, some of the key shifts that we've seen across the ECD ecosystem since 2018. And these aren't abstract policy shifts. They directly affect how people work in the sector, how roles are defined, where new opportunities for skills development might emerge. So first, there was the leadership migration, where ECD function moved from the DSD to the DBE in 2022. And it's been found to align early learning more closely with formal education system, to some extent improving coordination and visibility. And I think, again, let's think about what skills are needed in supporting this shift. Then there was the 2030 ECD strategy from the DBE, which was released in 2023, and gives a shared roadmap towards universal access, and it's framed around 6 social justice principles of access, redress, equity, quality, inclusivity, and efficiency, and signals a stronger focus on professionalization and evidence-based planning. So again, let's think about what skills might be needed to support this shift. And then implementation of that strategy has been accelerated through the Banapela shared blueprint that was launched earlier this year, which is a collaborative effort to operationalize the 2030 strategy to expand access, improve quality, resource the sector, strengthen systems. And again, let's think about the skills needed there. We also see regulatory reform underway. DBE is actively removing barriers that prevent informal centres from registering. There's the new Children's Amendment Bill, which is currently, I believe, still under consultation, that seeks to clarify funding, data, accountability mechanism. So again, like what legislative and policy-making skills might be needed here to support this shift? And as the system matures in the way that it is, how do we ensure that everyone working in the ecosystem has the skills to really thrive in this new environment? So why a skills lens on ECD? At its core, the ECD sector is a people system. The policies we've discussed, from the NICD policy to the 2030 strategy, they can only achieve their goals if the workforce behind them is skilled, supported, and valued. I think that the 2030 strategy itself puts this beautifully. The ECD workforce is the backbone of the ECD sector, and the expansion, upskilling, supervision, and mentoring of that workforce are prerequisites to both access and quality. And I think that's a powerful statement because it reminds us that scaling ECD services, it's not just about infrastructure or funding, it's about human potential. Today, the sector employs hundreds of thousands of people, mostly women, across formal and informal spaces, and it's a major part of South Africa's care economy. Yet many of these workers remain underpaid, under-recognized, and without clear progressive pathways. Training opportunities differ between departments and NGOs and TVETs. There's no unified skills framework that ties qualifications directly to the service packages of the NICD policy. But it's also an area of real opportunity. Building skills in the ECD workforce not only strengthens service quality, it supports youth employability and local economic development, which are, of course, both national priorities. It's about connecting policy, training, and livelihoods in a way that sustains both children's outcomes and people's futures. And when we talk about building skills for the future of ECD, it's important that we widen our lens beyond ECD centres alone. So the early childhood ecosystem extends into many locations of a child's life, homes and clinics, playgroups, community halls, libraries, and formal spaces where care and learning take place every day. And each of these spaces really requires different kinds of skills and capacities, from health and nutrition counselling to play facilitation to community mobilization, local management. So as we invite you to think broadly about this ecosystem and the skills needed within it, we do recognize that many of the most immediate opportunities for skills development and employment still lie within ECD centres themselves. But we'd like you to hold the holistic ecosystem view of where children grow and learn, together with the practicalities of strengthening capacity and professional pathways across the sector. So we've covered a lot this morning. um, from the evaluation insights on how integrated ECD services are functioning through to shifts in the ecosystem and the skills lens that shapes workforce of the future. And now it's over to you. So you'll be moving into breakout rooms, which will be smaller themed spaces where you can build on the evidence that's been shared and draw out the practical implications for workforce development. So the groups will be divided into 4 themes: maternal and child health, child social protection and safety, parenting and caregiver support, early learning, and also please do bring in ideas related to infrastructure, local services, and so on. I think that often cuts across all of these areas. So you'll have about 45 minutes, which we think is enough time to really dig in and have fruitful discussion. And in each room, there'll be colleagues from Seriti Institute and the Jubal Foundation who'll be there to help facilitate the conversation and take down some key notes. But we know that you are deeply embedded in this space, and so we really invite you to engage meaningfully in these conversations in the breakout rooms. So every group, regardless of the thematic area that you find yourself in, will be guided by 3 core questions that are exactly as they appear on this slide. And so to the facilitators of each and co-facilitators of each breakout room, I encourage you maybe just to take a screenshot of this so you can put it up on the screen for those in your group. So we're going to be covering what skills are needed to strengthen ECD service delivery, how we can collectively address skills gaps and strengthen pathways into work, and where employment opportunities or employability opportunities lie within the sector. So I think as you discuss, try to some extent to connect back to some of the findings of the evaluation, thinking about where the system is working well, where it's constrained, what kinds of new or hybrid roles might strengthen delivery and open up sustainable work opportunities. And when we come back together, we'll share a few highlights from each group. So we'll have people report back. Great. So I think without further ado, if those on the back end could start getting us ready to go off into breakout rooms. Thanks, everyone.
Amazing, thank you. And so helpful to use the ECD policy as the framework. I hope you're all buzzing with some interesting thoughts around where we sit with the ECD policy and what next. Hopefully the back end is about to open up the rabbit holes, and yeah, if you have landed up in a group that perhaps isn't your area of expertise, we invite you to bring your theme to that group. So
Great. So I had the opportunity to jump into a few different rooms, not all of them, but the ones I did get to join, there were some really interesting conversations happening. And so I know that all of you would have assigned someone to report back. Or if you haven't, then we do ask that that you please step forward as someone in each of the group just to share some of the key insights that emerged from your breakout room discussions. And you can always, if you feel you haven't covered things sufficiently, you can always give someone else in your group an opportunity as well. So yeah, let's get started with those that were in the maternal and child health nutrition, the first group. So it's Charmaine, Deborah, and others in that group. Let's hear from you first.
Charmaine and Deborah. Yeah.
Prudence is our host. Thanks, Prudence. There you are.
Yeah, so the discussion around the maternal and child care, basically, the first question in terms of how we were going to what skills are needed to strengthen service delivery? We were discussing about making use of the community champions that are already existing in our communities. This can include like programs. They made example about the NYS program and also the Seriti on its own. So these champions will be the people going around to make sure that some like service delivery in the community is actually being implemented at its fullest. So one of the challenges we ended up discussing is how much this is actually something that is valuable, but you'll find that these participants are actually underpaid. And some of them, like the motivation behind in terms of making sure that they do the work to their fullest is not there. So this create that barrier sometimes because the person is there, but already the moment they start, they're already worried that it's gonna end soon, which at the end it affects the whole point of what we're trying to do in terms of bridging the gap. And then the other advantage, another point that was raised was making use of assessment days in the communities, even in ECD centers, in churches, as a way to address some of the like issues that are raised. So this will include even things like supporting practitioners, special practitioners that are working with children with difficulties, that sometimes they get like emotionally strained, mentally, and all of that. How do we offer support to them? Because they are the key people that make sure that the children at the end, they receive the type of service they need. So if these practitioners receive some sort of support, whether from the church-based organization, whether from the local communities, where Charmaine even indicated, I don't know if it was Charmaine or Deborah, about a church adopting an ECD center to offer that weekly support to these centers as well. And also making sure that those parents that are at home that are sitting with their children, especially children with difficulties, when we have these community champions, they are able to reach there. Even if some of them are not able to reach there, if we also equip the church space, they go to church. So that's another platform which works in addressing these strategies. And then I think our last question, I'm just summarizing some of the things that were said. And then I think let's all emphasize the issue of making use of a referral system that will be used for some of the issues that are found in the communities as a way of like a communication portal with the relevant service providers available in the communities as well. And also like making use of awareness campaigns to teach the community members, parents, churches, everybody about different things, like different knowledge that is like limited in that space as well. And then in terms of employability opportunities in this sector, as I indicated at first, that this is sort of like a vicious cycle that the moment somebody gets employed in a particular program, they're already like starting to get anxious about, oh, when is it gonna end? But it's a matter of external control, which lies with government in terms of increasing the capacity of employability in the sector. I don't know, my team can add if I've left something out. Charmaine, Deborah, Leto, Makoma.
It looks like you've captured things well for your group. I don't see anyone else coming forward. So thanks so much for that. We can take a moment if anyone wants to offer any reflections on what's just been shared, just very briefly before moving on to feedback from the next breakout room. So yeah, if you have anything to add, please do so quickly. Over to you, Jess.
As a participant of this journey, I would love to add, I think when it comes to maternal and child health, often the ECD sector actually does lack the skills because of the education base many of the practitioners or professionals come from in an education setting. The birth to 3 space has been held, and very much the expertise, knowledge, confidence has sat with Department of Health and the health professionals. They're actually the ones that have historically held that space. And I think it's something to note in terms of integration, which I think is coming up more and more in these conversations, is how do we start to bridge those gaps and become more familiar and comfortable as perhaps educationalists or education practitioners in basic but correct, relevant, and evidence-based practices in the 0 to 3, given that the first 1,000 days is significant to ECD. So that's with no hat on, just Jessica.
Fantastic. One other opportunity for reflection, and then we'll move to the next group. Okay, let's move across. So the next breakout room was focusing on social protection and safety, and that was Gertrude's group.
Perfect. I'm going to speak on behalf of the group. I really hope I do them justice with my summary. But yeah, when we looked at the first question, which was about the skills needed, a lot of the people in the group weren't necessarily directly focused or involved in ECD. So we just came together with the different programs and knowledge that we run on an external basis. But the one thing that we touched on was the knowledge advancement. So really capacitating the ECD practitioners with rich information with regards to the space. But one thing that kept coming up was also trying to strengthen the training and the understanding, especially within the ECD space, but also communities on the different areas of children. We spoke a lot about neglect and that certain communities don't necessarily understand what that even means. So leaving their kid at home, for example, is something that they deem as there's nothing wrong with it. So really getting that training and information into these communities, understanding children's emotional, psychosocial, and mental support needs. And we also briefly touched on, especially in the space of looking at how we protect children, is the neurodiverse element in these communities. Often within the low marginalized communities, a lot of children who are neurodiverse or come from special populations are involved in the general ECD space. And they often are either neglected or ignored or deemed as extremely naughty due to the lack of understanding of what this actually means. So how can we get that knowledge across to both the communities? Because often it is a or like a cultural basis as to why we don't believe in certain things. So yeah, how can we be able to strengthen that information knowledge to both the ECD sector as well as the community? Then when we looked at the second part, which looked at how can we collectively address these gaps, we said one thing is really equipping these ECD centers with some digital solutions, especially those protection skills that remain unclear to them. And then also looking at how we can really look at strengthening the data, the monitoring, and the tracking on who is accessing these multiple services. And then again, bringing in those parents to understand, making sure that it's a whole ecosystem, that it's not the practitioners or the ECD centers against the community. We can all work as one if we all have that knowledge together. And then the last one, the employment opportunities, we said that there is definitely and understandably the need for formal ECD settings. But in a country, for example, like in South Africa, it's not always possible. So how can we look at different home visits? So employing people to be able to address these home visits, be able to go door to door and be able to help the communities within this. The parent support programs, which a lot of non-profit or private sector people are doing, as well as play groups and informal play groups. I know a lot of communities are actually going around and employing parents who are unemployed to run informal play groups within their settings, and really making sure that all the children have access in a safe environment to be able to get the education that they need. And then our biggest question, and something that we didn't really answer, and I know we've heard it already, is that we do train people in the space, or there is a lot of NGOs or private sectors or even government, but then what happens? There's no clear pathway to the sustainability of how do we keep paying for these services? How do we make sure that they last longer than just once they're trained, then they start to work, and then what? So we really said that government need to start putting children as their first agenda, looking at the partnerships with private funders or nonprofits. But we do know that one big area is that there's a lot of red tape in government. Nonprofits who come potentially even with their own funding address government into how they can help, and it takes 18 months to 2 years to even get a signed MOU. So how are we addressing these red tapes with government to make sure that they're putting children first, dealing with outside sectors, but then also making plans within government themselves? Anyone else from the group? I don't know if you have anything to add.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And I think let's just extend that invite as well to anyone from any other group who might have a quick reflection.
Just a quick reflection. It appears that as grassroots level workers, we might have our finger on the pulse of information that policymakers might not. You were talking about evidence-based practices, Jessica, and if we could find some way amongst this learning community to document what we see as the gaps, we might not have the solutions yet, but if we can document the gaps, we might be able to put together, I guess, a shadow report to inform government as they're busy making policy modifications, that this ECD space, which is going through so many transitions, is going to need documented grassroots level input from us in our various ways that we contribute to ECD, so that we can then say to government, here's what we find on the ground. This is what the policy needs to adapt to or to address, because we don't want policy evaporation. I think what Deborah was saying in our group is that there are such beautiful policies, but we don't always see the implementation going fast enough or well enough for the children and the ECD workers to benefit. And then even for the young unemployed persons to find employability. So that's one of the areas to address. And then I'm seeing an employment opportunity. Many of us are speaking about disability, and disability happens to be one of my passions. Disability mainstreaming is what the white paper for education states, but it's very hard to implement in rural ECD schools, for example. And so I'm going, what if we could train young people to be disability participation supporters? And we could convince government we need a budget to employ young people to go into ECDs and support learners with neurodiversities or different support needs. And they don't have to be disability experts. They are simply young people who support young learners who might not even be diagnosed but have evident needs. So thank you for that.
Okay, thanks so much, Shavena. So you were getting a lot of positive audience validation with hearts and things as you put those topics up. Great. So the next breakout room was quite a small one with Gary and Neo, parenting and caregiver support. So it'd be great to hear back from the two of you, and if anyone else was in your group as well.
Thanks, Katherine. I think Neo is got her other half trying to facilitate some kind of training. So I offered to feedback. It was a small group. Unfortunately, it was just the two of us. There were one or two people in the group who weren't able to actually converse because they were sort of locked out. But I think that the key things coming out of our conversation was, and maybe even linking it into what Charmaine's just said, is that I don't think, well, I'm not an expert down at the grassroots level. The work we do is actually in behavior change. And so I was sort of approaching the question asked around parenting and their role in child's development is, well, what is it going to take to change behaviors? Because I think if we just assume that we can carry on doing what we're currently doing, I think we'll be busy, but we won't be effective. So the questions, well, the information I think we need to make decisions about how to change it is, why are parents not as involved as we would like them to be? And I don't know if there is current work or research out there, but clearly parents are not as involved as they could or should be. I think this goes broadly through the whole education space, but is even worse at the ECD level, is why are they not getting involved? And to me, what is it going to take to get them involved? So rather than us coming, let's fall in love with the problem, not the solution. Rather than, I mean, maybe it's some kind of research, and I think it should inform practice, not necessarily policy, because I don't think we need another policy on how parents should behave. And maybe we've just got to take those learnings and start applying them in our spaces. So that's, I think, I didn't feel it would be helpful to get into skills and workforce until we understand what those blockages are. I think my other reflection is, how do we make this whole role of parenting less intimidating for parents? Because we work with the Department of Education in Limpopo, and when we ask about parenting, there's this 100-page training document. And to me, that's just intimidating and impractical. So how could we also simplify the messaging, which may come out of sort of the research around parents saying, well, don't just tell me what to do, show me how to do it. I think that, if one thinks about how schools are run, schools have school governing bodies, and school governing bodies may be a little bit more of a structure that is a bridge between the ECD and the community or the parent. Not being an expert on, call it, the structures that exist around ECDs, before the transition from social development to DBE, I think every creche or every ECD that was funded had to be an NGO. And I think that's not changed. So everybody talks about management committees, but maybe we should be asking, as part of the research or the learning, is, don't ECDs need somebody who can be the go-between between the community and parents and the creche? So not somebody who's interested in finance or specific things, but that's genuinely interested in having more parental involvement. I did hear, somebody in the earlier group talking about, sometimes going door to door because, maybe if there are parents who continue to show zero interest, maybe there could be a referral to just try and go and engage those parents in a different style, other than just come to the meeting, or maybe you have to actually go and knock on the door. So yeah, I think it was, what can we learn? Because my understanding is that we do need parents. We do need parents complementing children's development. And it doesn't seem to be that good at the moment. So what can we learn so that we can influence how ECDs work with parents and how parents work with ECDs?
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing those really deep reflections. Thanks to you, Neo. And again, I'm seeing a lot of validation from all the other participants. So very briefly, anyone want to reflect on what Gary's just shared? Okay, I think we can jump into the next group then, which is early learning discussion with Megan, Nomvula, and others. So over to your reporter.
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, I'll go ahead, and please, the rest of the group, please jump in if I miss anything key to our discussion. So I've just got three or four main points to add. The first one being, and it's been spoken about already, but just to add, that there's a big gap in career paths from to touch on 0 to 3 years within the ECD sector. So, someone coming out of school, into tertiary, into employment, what does that actually look like for a person that wants to go into 0 to 3 years, a practitioner or a principal? So that was seen as a big gap in terms of employability. Secondly, we looked at partnerships and how important they are to making early learning happen, and the importance of job opportunities through funding. And we spoke about funding that needs to be long-term, strategic, intentional, sustainable. So it's not a once-off project, but more an investment. And of course, one of these important investments is job opportunities, as well as we spoke about both government department partnerships, as well as partnerships with businesses who can fund something like a parent and caregiver support program that doesn't rely on government funding. But if training happens correctly, companies have almost a captured audience in their workforce, obviously parents and caregivers in their workforce. So how do we tap into those parents and caregivers in order to extend early learning into the homes, and also capacitate parents to take some of the weight off ECD practitioners? So that goes into the next point, which is looking at ECD centers as hubs of early learning or early learning space, to create more opportunities, as well as upskill current employees, and then linked to the previous point to upskill parents and caregivers within the community. ECD centers are so community and people-based, so we have to kind of work within that context. Part of that point was around perhaps looking at the ECD sector as a little bit broader, other than ECD centers, but perhaps day mother programs, for instance. So the ECD center model doesn't always apply to every context. So how do we look at supporting something like a day mother a little bit more, while still aiming to standardize the quality of early learning program across all those different models. So yeah, there was a big emphasis on standardization, both in terms of training as well as kind of the key focus areas that NPOs, NGOs, and business focus on, so that we're all working to the same goal.
Great, thanks so much, Megan. I think if anyone has any reflections to share, also please feel free to do that in the chat. But a quick moment to see if anyone wants to address those directly now. Anyone want to speak? Okay, I think then we can move to the next breakout room, which was maternal and child health, our second maternal and child health and nutrition group. Kodani, Tando, Shannon, that was your group. So over to one of you.
Much has written. So I'm just mindful of time. So I'll just briefly go through what my team and I discussed. So firstly, to address the first question, what skills are needed to strengthen ECD service delivery policy area? So what we had done was qualified teachers and teachers assistants, qualified data capturers, nutritionists, and cook, and also the skills of report writing, computer skills, and also business communication. But the one skill that stood out was definitely the mainstream toys. So there's definitely a lack of resources in terms of appropriate toys at ECD centers that stimulate children accordingly. Yes, so a lack of resources in that aspect, that was the one that stood out. My team is more than welcome to let me know if I'm missing anything, but that was just a brief overview of what we discussed for the first question. And then the second question was, how can we collectively address skill gaps and strengthen pathways into work? So firstly, Shannon noted that you'd find that a lot of NPOs and NGOs actually have programs that address certain skill sets, but they lack the appropriate marketing skills to get themselves known and also market what they do to potentially attract funders. So we set the skill gap that is find that it's common. It's the lack of marketing from NGOs and NPOs. And then we also touched on the fact that there's a lack of platforms where NPOs and NGOs are brought into one space, a broader space, and they can talk about what it is that they do to funders and potentially get funding. So one of the solutions in long term that we're looking at is possibly getting government to nominate an NGO based on a criteria that they would have created, nominate an NGO that represents a province. And that NGO would work in alignment with the government to ensure that every year there are seminars that are hosted. And every year when these seminars are hosted, this certain number of NGOs and NPOs would have received funding to help them implement their programs, training, or whatever the case is. And then what we also mentioned was Ukodani, one of my team members, mentioned that she attended a workshop whereby they were discussing implementing trainings for the age groups of 0 to 3. But now the question was, when we are conducting trainings, are we looking at
is there a demand for the specialization? And also, where are people going to be placed in terms of employment? So there's another skill gap. Are we aligning our trainings with the demand out there? And also, are there opportunities that these people will be exposed to once they're like specialized and certified? And then the last question was, where do employability opportunities lie within the sector? So broadly, we said that where there's a lack of skills, there's opportunities, because it's either teachers will either be self-employed or they will be employed. But there's something that Ukodani touched on in terms of diversifying income streams, what she experienced when she was in Kenya. And I would like for her to just briefly touch on that to tackle this third question.
Thanks, Ntando, and yeah, hi everybody. I'm just adding an example in terms of other innovations, maybe which can be brought into the space for livelihoods. And I was just giving an example of something that I actually recently experienced visiting another country when we were looking at their ECD and how it works. And in that country, they don't necessarily have government backing. So it means that whatever happens, they take care of it themselves as practitioners within the space or within ECD. And some of the things that we learned or noted, and again, there's always that understanding that what works in another country does not necessarily work in our context, depending on the structural mechanisms of how the country works. And in our case, obviously, it might be different, but there was the mindset idea in terms of how people actually do a lot of things to actually make things work. For instance, there was a model where you would find that those who are daycare practitioners or those who owned daycares, they would actually diversify their offering in terms of how they actually have a payment mechanism. That was one way where you find that because some of the parents cannot necessarily afford a monthly payment, but they get piece jobs in between, they tend to actually send their children to a daycare center when they actually have to go to work. And based on that, it's a different kind of service where you're not obliged to actually have a child throughout. And in that, they also get people to actually pay daily rates because they're just making sure or covering the fact that at the end of the month, the person might not necessarily have the money, but if they actually brought the child because they had the money, it made a difference in terms of how that worked. They're also diversified in terms of when the child actually goes to daycare. For those who worked night shifts, they will actually provide services for night daycare because the parent during the day will actually be looking after the child. And maybe just to put it in proper context, in that country, kids start going to school from the age of 3, meaning that you're looking at the birth to 2-year-olds or till the latter months. And in that, it meant that they are kind of like supporting the child during the evenings, which is actually opening up a different kind of income stream whereby they're not just looking after kids in the afternoon, but they actually have boarding in the evenings. And again, depends on policy and how it works in that country. And then there was diversification in terms of the different offerings, whereby it's not just focused on ECD, where you find that those who have a small piece of land, they would actually have gardens in their home, at their daycare, and actually sell the produce, which actually subsidizes the income that actually comes in. And others had different offerings. So it was not just gardens. You find that someone is selling it has things that they're actually selling, which they provide to the parents, or where parents actually get to buy from them. And from the perspective of parents' involvement, one of the things which happened was that you find that in some instances, parents have their own little gardens at home and they actually sell to the daycare center, which then provides them with income to actually pay for the child to go to school. And in that, it's another ecosystem which is actually touching on the community and how you actually support the communities which don't necessarily have the money to take the children to the daycare center. Again, there were a lot of different ideas, but the main one was more of diversifying your services, and it doesn't have to be within just ECD. It can be in other things just so that you subsidize the income, because the reason we lose practitioners, it's also because they don't actually get paid enough, and thinking about what are other ways to actually get the income into the space to be able to subsidize their incomes. Yeah, that was just an example. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Some very rich learnings there. Thanks, Kadani, and also Ntando. So next up, if we could hear from the second social protection and safety group. So that was Adelaide, Jessica. Great to hear from your group next.
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to give a few points. Our group had such a stimulating conversation around the different layers and levels of skills required in the sector, and specifically when it comes to social protection. We spoke quite a bit about engaging ECDs as well as communities as a whole. So rather than focusing only on the ECD center, really looking at community gatherings where DSD, DOH can be present to support those referral pathways. We spoke about some of the challenges with short-term skills placements, and how the reality is hard when you hear about cases and they go like there's no sustained connection point if you have short-term engagements in a community. We spoke about growing food for food insecure homes, but also the challenges that can sometimes bring and the lack of information that the communities have. So we spoke about the skill of being able to collect that information from the community and deliver it back to the right platforms. There were some lovely examples of the DigiChamps through the NYS as being examples of individuals that can collect community data and feed it into community structures. Yes, we also spoke a little bit about actually volunteerism, interestingly enough, in a webinar about employability. It was interesting to hear about the opportunities that actually exist within a volunteerism space for experiential learning, but also to get the involvement from parents. Gary, to some of your points, around how do we explore volunteerism as a skill that could expose individuals in communities to different areas or themes or job opportunities. And we actually had a practitioner, Mandy, or a principal on the call, and it was so exciting to hear from a principal herself the value that person would add. We mentioned a whole bunch of different skills: cleaning, chopping, admin, digital marketing, supporting the other group's contribution, fundraising, dishes, windows. So we got quite practical there with our suggestions, and then storytelling. So thinking through what might incentivize parents to add value, and perhaps allowing the child to go to school without having to pay because you have contributed in a voluntary capacity was one of the suggestions. We spoke about stakeholder meetings and the need for stakeholder engagement skills to be present in a community. Collaboration and partnership also coming up as a strong skill suggestion. The war rooms in KZN was mentioned as the example, and that might be something for us to explore around the skill set required to advocate in a platform such as a community stakeholder meeting, a municipal gathering, or in that case, a war room. So, yeah, sounds exciting. We also spoke about communication and how that skill doesn't need to necessarily mean you are literate to write, but your ability to communicate your lived reality in these community platforms is very important. We spoke a bit about accredited learning, and I think there are some challenges at every layer and level with accreditation. And so that tension between the public employment space and civil society, continues. Yes, and then parenting skills also came up again as a point within social protection, really understanding my role as a parent. That's us.
Thanks so much, Jess, and to those of you who've offered some additional insights and reflections in the chat. So moving across then to our parenting and caregiver support, the second group, Bonnie, Jimena, and others, over to you.
Thanks so much, Katherine. Yes, I'll be supported by Bonnie. I'll provide a little bit of an sort of a sense. We jumped around all over the place. I'm sorry, Katherine, we didn't stick to your agreed schedule, but it was a very stimulating conversation, really great. And we were also a small group, so we only had sort of Seriti, and then we had Year Beyond, and we also had Save the Children. But enough to give us good, exciting stuff. So in essence, like what others were saying, we were saying how important the public employment projects are to sort of add that employability lens to this whole sector. So, for example, we in Seriti, who run this Arabapiling parent support program, we found in some cases, Bonnie was saying in hers, she works in Standerton, 50% of the caregivers she trained through the program had actually joined NYS. So those are young, unemployed parents and caregivers who were given an opportunity. They already came in with skills and they were able to leverage off that and become actual ECD champions and other things in their community. The key is working on what Kodani was saying, which is incredibly important. It's also about not only supporting parents and caregivers and what others were saying. So there's two perspectives, there's two parts of this, there's two facets. There's helping parents and caregivers to realize the important role they play. And often it's, I think, Gary, you were talking about, let's unpack why. Why are they not more involved? Often it's because they don't realize that they should be playing this role and that it is a critical role. They don't have those kind of skills. They don't have the confidence. That's what we find. So as we build up their confidence, we've started measuring what's called parent self-efficacy, which is measuring the parents' confidence in being able to support their young children. So that's quite important. What another aspect is around being able to maintain their involvement, and that's a challenge that was brought up within the group. And a suggestion we had that we use as WhatsApp groups with the parents and caregivers to maintain that kind of momentum and provide that support. Right. So what we found through our parenting program is they use the engagements as kind of support groups. They don't get to talk about their challenges. And so we give them a space and then we hold that space and help them continue with that space. So that's one aspect. But also a lot of these parents and caregivers are unemployed, right? So they've got a lot of mental health issues. They're stressed, which affects their ability to be good parents and caregivers. So how do we deal with the other part, which is that stress? So that comes with the employability angle. And so what we've unearthed in terms of our work with the NYS is really helping them understand that they have skills. A lot of them don't realize they've got skills. So it was talking about what Kodani was saying. Let's open it up. So what we were talking about is it's important to strengthen the ECD ecosystem, but when it comes to strengthening employability and the confidence and mental health of the parents and caregivers, we might have to look beyond that ecosystem and bring in others. So this is where we're talking about helping these parents and caregivers and unemployed youth realize that actually they are skilled. So I'll give you a really wonderful example that Bonnie was, that we have in the NYS. So we had a problem with the T-shirts arrived for NYS and they were the wrong size and there was no time to be able to sort this out. And so one of the participants said, oh, I sew. And we're like, oh, can you sort it out? And she's like, absolutely. And in 2 days, she sorted out all the T-shirts and started a side hustle because she realized she had a skill she could sell. There's another one, in terms of babysitting services. Bonnie was saying somebody realized that actually they're a good babysitter. They know what it's like to be a good caregiver, and they're selling babysitting services. So it's really around helping these young people unearth what skills they've got and supporting them to have the confidence and opening these social networks, right? So employability, what's important is this idea of building social capacity, social networks. And that's what you're doing, is building those social networks. We also spoke about the importance of NGOs can't be expected to do this alone, and it's come up in various conversations before. And the problem is that the public employment project that a lot of us are working on, is that it's great, but it's too short, and it actually, we spoke about it before, people are worried, when is it going to end, what's coming next, etc. So the points made before are incredibly important. This understanding of the landscape, better understanding of the skills, the gaps, the opportunities. And in our group, we spoke about leveraging off community strengths, right? This is not about us coming and saying to the community, this is what you should do. The community has a lot of knowledge, and it's about really kind of catalyzing that, working with them as a partner to unearth this and work together with strategies. And at the end of our conversation, Bonnie can also attribute to this, we were having sort of discussions on, okay, well, how can we do this? And, we've spoken about setting up an agency for these parents and caregivers to go out there and offer their services. And I was like, well, that's not so easy. So why don't we actually put the ball in their court? And why don't we get NYS participants to form groups, and we can provide them with a bit of a reference letter and say they've done all this work, please bring them on board to help you with your children, or whatever the case is. So it's really around kind of helping them with different creative strategies. I'm just trying to see if I've forgotten anything else, but yeah, I think, partnerships. Critical. So we couldn't have done it without partnerships, right? And this is what this today is about. It's about bringing ourselves all together. We've all got nuggets of information. We can start. I see the ecosystem as a puzzle, and we all bring different bits of the puzzle together. And the more bits of the puzzle, the better we're going to understand it. And partnerships are critical. So our colleague in the group is saying that they wanted to work with Kulu Trust. So it was Simone. Simone was saying, we want to work with Kulu Trust because they do this fabulous book sharing. We've been working with Kulu Trust for a long time. And so we've added within our parenting program the book sharing from Kulu Trust. We've also added psychosocial support. So it's around making it holistic, but we can't do it. We can't do everything alone. So this brings us to a really good platform. How do we work together to fill those gaps? Bonnie, I don't know others in my group if I missed something, but in the interests, I know time is marching, so I promise I talk very fast when time is marching, so I hope I didn't miss anything. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Jimena. I think let's head on to the final group today, which is our second early learning group. Amanda, Mampe, colleagues, let's hear very briefly from you what you discussed, and then we'll soon go into next steps and wrap up.
Hi, I'll be just presenting what we discussed.
Thanks.
So most of what came out, or what it was focused on for achieving your early learning goals, ended up focusing on the practitioners, where what came up, many practitioners aren't properly qualified or don't have the experience or knowledge to actually implement what is needed in the classroom, specifically referring to things like age-appropriate activities in the classroom, being able to observe and assess children to see if their children are on track, is there a learning disability that they've noticed, and supporting inclusive learning, taking part in the classrooms. So we think the skills that are needed are very much focused on upskilling, or actually just skilling, if I can say it that way, those who are acting as ECD practitioners. Sorry, let me just check my notes. There's a lack of courses or training for ECD practitioners, but it also came out in the group that this is very much dependent on which province you're in and which community you're in, because there are many NGOs and other projects that focus on upskilling, but there seems to be a bit lacking, especially if you look towards your rural areas, which isn't as easily reachable or accessible as other parts of the country. What did come out is that, again, very much like you mentioned earlier, it's in the NGOs can't do this alone. So you do need a partnership with like your DBE and DSD to work together. But what also we found was what might be a way of actually addressing the skills gap is a collaboration between the NGOs and organizations focused in this sector, where they can get together and say, basically almost develop a pathway or a policy on, this is what's worked for us in our centers, this is what hasn't worked, share that information and come up with a plan of implementation to say, these are the necessary steps to take with regards to implementing training as well as certain aspects in an ECD center to make sure ECD centers are becoming more uniform and making sure that children receive the same type of education to make sure that they are all more equal than rather being like, well, the ECD center in a center is more resourced and therefore their children are a step ahead. So collaborating on forming a implementation pathway to make sure all ECDs are implementing the same curriculum, the same style, focusing on the same skills for both their practitioners and those attending the ECD centers. Let me just look at the next one. We also questioned, are there enough ECD centers? If we are focusing on training practitioners and getting them qualified, will there be enough employment opportunities or at ECD centers? Are there enough ECD centers themselves? And we came to the conclusion, if I can say it that way, that there are enough ECD centers. It's just that many of them don't have enough funding to support more practitioners and teaching aides. Many of them aren't registered, so that's also makes it more difficult to take on and to further help qualify the practitioners that already exist in those spaces. What also came out from Mweti in Limpopo is that the training that they do receive is from 0 to 8, the foundation phase. So if someone who has gone through training can't get employment in an ECD center, they do have the opportunity or the skills to focus on the ages from 5 to 8, so going into your primary school level. So there's always that employment opportunity which can combine. We also, there was a point now that I'm missing that I wanted to say. In any case, maybe it'll pop up again. With the employability sectors, how that can increase is, again, the movement from not just 0 to 5, but from 5 to 8 as well if needed. In Limpopo, they have almost a youth volunteer program that's been implemented. They get the skills, they volunteer at the centers, they learn skills, they get that knowledge and expertise, and often they are given referral or reference letters which states this person is employable. We would love to employ them. Unfortunately, we can't for whatever reason at this time. So let's give them a referral letter so that they can find other employment somewhere else within the sector. We also...
Thanks.
Sorry, can I just do one last point?
Yes, sure. You can go through it very briefly.
Practitioners who have been in the industry for years and years and might not want to continue as practitioners anymore, make them mentors or facilitators that travel around giving their knowledge, mentoring people that have just started in the ECD sector. That's it.
Great, thank you. Such rich conversations happening in all of the breakout rooms. I'm going to hand over to Jimena now just to go through next steps and wrap up for us. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Katherine. Yes, and thanks so much for the rich conversations. I'm sorry we have to kind of rush it at the end. But just to say, next steps are going to be that Katherine is going to be putting together a learning brief to capture all the richness that's come out today, and it'll be circulated to you for final kind of inputs. And the idea is really to catalyze further conversations. And so we're quite excited about that. Just in terms of wrapping it up, I wanted to ask if you would please do a little Mentimeter for me. Just curious to hear what people, kind of how you're leaving the room. I'm putting it in the chat. If you could just go to menti.com and just put in that code, and then I can share. We're going to do a little word cloud just to see. Hopefully everybody's excited and all kind of rearing to go for this for the next chapter of this conversation. I hope everybody can see that Menti. So it's just in the chat. If you can just check it out, please. I'll also just quickly. Yes, if you can also do that. And if anybody's feeling brave enough to tell us what next steps they want to take from this, what are they going to be doing from this next session? What inspired you? What do you want to take through next? That would also be great if you could put it in the chat. Great, it's coming out. I'm just going to share my screen so you can see. Thanks so much, everybody. There it is. So potential, hopeful, hope, collaboration, opportunities, collective effort. Really great. So fantastic. Thanks so much. It's been such a wonderful session. And we're really grateful to all of you for attending. We want to thank everybody in the room for all their fabulous contributions, such a wonderful, rich discussion. It's been such a great partnership with Katherine and Do More Foundation. And I'm really sorry that we kind of had to rush it at the end, but we're really, really grateful. And we're particularly grateful to yourselves and also to Standard Bank for having made this opportunity possible. We're really, really grateful. So thanks, everybody. And this really encapsulates kind of how we're all feeling. We're ready to kind of partner. And so hopefully this is one of many conversations and platforms where we can really make a change. So thank you to everybody in the room. And I hope you all have a great, great day. Thank you so much.